Thank you. All the speakers who preceded made some very compelling points, and thank you for coming. As you know, every one of you, almost by definition, have engaged in robust conversations with a lot of your friends in recent months. And probably this historic auditorium has the highest percentage of people who can resist peer group pressure in New York City. I live in strange times, times when people who know, like all of us, are prisoners of a 224-year-old electoral college winner-take-all two-party electoral dictatorship. And at least we should try to break out of jail instead of making an unspoken assumption as to why so many people who call themselves liberals are opposing the progressive Nader campaign, whose agenda they agree with. How's that for a change? You think they'd go after the Electoral College? You think they'd push for runoff voting? You think they'd push for public funding of public campaigns? You think they'd go after those who steal elections from Tallahassee to Washington, D.C.? You think they'd go after the kind of almost mocking attitude toward the simple act of counting votes accurately. We're the laughingstock of 50 countries. They want to send observers over here. You see, how do we mess up the system so badly when our northern neighbor just has paper ballots, 500 voters per precinct to make sure everything's close to home and work? By 11 p.m., they know who won, who didn't. And not us. Touch-tone systems, no paper trails, software that can be hacked into, hanging chads, all kinds of shenanigans about who gets registered and who gets dropped, all kinds of trap doors keeping candidates off ballots, phony lawsuits, the invocation of these ballot access barriers that are put in there after World War I to make sure that there isn't the kind of plethora of third parties as there were in the 19th century, that broke the ground, that started the social justice movements in a political vein parallel to the citizen movements who were marching for all these great objectives for a humane and sane society. Many of them are right here in this hall, were the great speakers for the abolition of slavery and the women's right to vote, and the great labor rallies to give workers a decent livelihood and the right to form trade unions and collective bargaining. Right here, we saw so many of the peace movements, the anti-war movements. We saw the basis set in robust presentations for many of the social justice advances that the New Deal finally picked up on. It's always the third party, it's always the independent candidates who break ground, who have the big ideas about where their country should go. It's always these third parties and independent candidates who never win a national election, but they're willing to fight even if they lose, and to fight even if they lose, and to fight even if they lose, until the agenda prevails. The Democrats, who should be landsliding Bush, that corporation disguised as a human being in the White House, that messianic militarist, that draft-dodging chicken hawk, that person who always sides with big business against workers and communities and consumers, and they can't beat him easily. The reason why this election is so close is not because they're so different from one another. It's that they're so similar with one another. It's almost a replay of what Daniel P. Moynihan said about why the Gore-Bush campaigns were so close in 2000. You said they're so close, not because they're so different, it's because they are so similar. When you don't draw a bright line between the Democrats and the Republicans, things become wishy-washy, things become ambiguous. Protective imitation becomes a tactic for both of them as they take one issue after another of compelling interest to the people off the table, one issue after another. And these issues illustrate the infirmity of the political system, that it cannot defend us anymore against the predatory powers of large corporations who penetrated one area after another of our political economy. They have put for sale signs on our elections, on our Congress, on our agencies and departments, which they control inside and out, with their executives taking time off and going into high positions in the Treasury Department, Defense Department, Interior Department, Food and Drug Administration, Transportation Department, etc. And their lobbying swarming all over on the outside with their political action committee, funneling money into more and more of the 535 men and women who constitute our Congress. Really now, how can we allow 535 men and women, a majority of them, to be controlled by 1,500 corporations who don't have a single vote? We're the ones who have the vote. We're the ones who've been taking too much time off from our political and civic energies. We're the ones who, a mere 2 million people organized into civic clubs monitoring in each congressional district their member of Congress, can have an enormous effect in turning around that huge lever that decides budgets and policies. And we have to recognize, as Patti Smith's famous song recognizes, that the people have the power. If we don't recognize that, we're not going to organize it. If we don't organize it, we're not going to focus it. We're not going to give it a cutting edge so that we can turn this country around in so many directions for a wonderful life for our people and a wonderful relation with the rest of the world. Instead of presenting the rest of the world with bristling, deadly arms, selling them to dictators and oligarchs who are using them on their own people, instead of becoming just a military superpower, we've got the greatest capacity in the history of the world to become a humanitarian superpower. And that means taking the lead on the global environment to preserve the planet already. Climate change, called global warming, already. Acid rain, serious depletion of the oceans. This may be the last generation that can do anything to stop the irreversible deterioration of the state of our oceans. The tropical forests being cut down, millions of acres a year in the equatorial belt, not to mention back home. We can take the lead in this, but the polluters say no, and the polluters are the corporations largely. And the politicians say, well, I guess that's who we have to obey. Again and again, who says no to what the people want? The people want insurance, health insurance and health care for all. And they want quality care, they want reasonable prices. They don't want to be told pay or die, like so many elderly people facing these drug prices.